Hey, we're live. So I'm here with John Campbell. How are you doing, John?
Pretty good, David. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So thanks for taking the time to come on and talk a little bit, share your perspective on things. And before we get into it, maybe just introduce yourself, like tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm John Campbell, lifelong Montrealer, but born in Glasgow. Yeah, not much more. I mean, I'm an IT professional. Um, Not much more I can say as far as that. I mean, I'm a Montrealer.
What about your interest in coming on the podcast? What intrigued you about the podcast? Why do you want to talk about things philosophical and religious or spiritual?
Well, you and I have met recently through a space that we share with others, and the conversations we've been having over the course of the last several months. In fact, there's been a lot of in some ways it's been a one long conversation between different people, but there's been a consistent sort of understanding that the crisis that we've been living through for the last 2 years has brought people to a spiritual awakening of sorts. And I think that there's a theme here. The theme has been that, in fact, it is our only way out, in my opinion, is to move beyond the material and into a more spiritual perspective. Because I think that the crisis here is due to a process of materialism, scientism that has been in play for a long time, and I think it's a dead end. And I think in the summer of 2020, that's when I realized for myself, as somebody who has been a seeker of sorts for most of my adult life and most of my life, even as a child. So it was a realization that despair is what happens when you are at a spiritual impasse and you have to move beyond it. So I think that's. So then when I heard you sent me a link to another person that we've been conversing with over the last several months, Tom Meunier, and I was fascinated with that discussion. It was interesting, and it reminded me of the kinds of conversations we have here. It was one-on-one between you and Tom. So I listened to that and the whole thing pretty much in one sitting, 2.5 hours, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then I heard a much earlier conversation you had with Anthony Brown.
Green.
And I really, Green, Brown, yes, Green.
Green with 3 E's.
That's right, Green with 3 E's. So Anthony Green, and I really enjoyed that as well. And then Ivan. So Ivan Freud. So between that, I thought this is great. So I was very pleased, and I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah. So I want to touch a little bit on what you said about the despair and the spiritual life, and at different points in my life, I can think about these sort of peak moments where you do deep introspection. Usually, it's a moment of trauma or a moment of bliss or joy or ecstasy, or just a moment of deep confusion. There's several moments in my life. I can think of one here in Montreal where I saw a woman that was on, I would imagine, some sort of heavy drugs, psychotic drugs like PCP or something, and she had a superhuman strength. I was agnostic at the time. She had a superhuman strength, and she was throwing around 3 or 4 large policemen. Whoa. And her body was going from the vertical upright position to a horizontal position. Like the pivot point was her feet, and she was just smacking her body and her face on the pavement.
Oh my God!
In a supernatural movement at one point. And then when the cops moved in, like they were just like rag dolls, So that happened at the Leonard Cohen Park there, the little park.
I know the park.
So I was agnostic, and I was thinking, I'm not sure if God exists, but it looks like Satan's real. So this is a theme in COVID. A lot of people are being awakened that I don't know if God exists, but I know for sure Satan is real. Can you talk a little bit about that in particular, and then in general, just about your own, some of the peak experience you've had where you thought that maybe there's something more than the material? Because you touched on that briefly.
Well, I think, okay, so I mean, just a quick background here would probably help to make sense of what comes after. But Growing up, now I call myself a cultural Catholic. Um, I was baptized, confirmed, first confession. I've got everything. Went through the whole bit. By 11 years old, you're in the Catholic Church. That's it. You're married to the Catholic Church. But of course, they do this before. They make sure that this is all done before you're even teenager. So now, having gone through all that, and I went to a Catholic school, and I was quite a pious kid. I had this pious stage in my life where I was like, I really was quite. I have to say, from a young age, fascinated by the Old Testament. The Old Testament, I love the stories. I mean, I remember my parents giving us, my sister and I, a Bible coloring book, where they tell the story of the Bible. And I remember I didn't know, I didn't know anything really about the Bible. I was 6 years old, I think, or so, and I learned to color in that book. And so I was fascinated with the Old Testament. And then when you go through first confession, you start to learn about Jesus and his life. And I thought this was, it's a fascinating story, right? I mean, it's a fascinating story. So I was quite exposed early on to all these mythologies. Now I realize now that in terms of my friends, there's not many of us that went through. Not many of my friends know what that is like, to be raised in that quite religious, where religion is actually a part of our lives, right? And my father used to take me to mass, and we got lapsed before I got into my teens. But so at the same time, I was fascinated with space and with the stars. And I started to be, through that interest, I started to learn about the gods, the Greek mythology and the Roman mythology, because you see that all the planets are named after gods and goddesses, right? So this is all pretty much before the age of 10. Like when I was 8 years old, my father got me a book called the Golden Stamp Book of Stars and Planets. And I'll never forget it. In fact, when I see you can still get copies of it today, old copies. But that book, I learned all about the stars and planets. You had to basically, you would have a page for Jupiter, and then you'd have to match a picture to the page, and then you would learn about all the moons of Jupiter and its relative size to all the other planets and so on. So for me, these two things have been a constant in my life. In a sense, now I don't consider myself a Catholic anymore. Like I said, I consider myself a cultural Catholic, and philosophically tended to be agnostic on the question, especially when it comes to monotheism. But I was always a believer in something greater than oneself, because you look up at the sky and we're part of something much bigger, right? We're part of this planet, and the planet is part of something much bigger. And so that's my background there. And I think that in my late teens was when I started to, after being the usual angry teen, I think in my late teens, I would have to say that I'd experimented with hallucinogenic drugs, and not to any great extent, but after the first time I experimented, you become aware that there's something. It was almost like a veil had been lifted, that things weren't what they always seemed to be. And from that point on, I started to read people like Alan Watts and Krishnamurti, Joseph Campbell, because I was just fascinated with mythology, and Carlos Castaneda. Yeah. Excuse me. And so that was, and then I got into Gurdjieff through reading Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. So I was covering a lot of ground in my late teens and early 20s. This is especially accelerated after my father died. So my father died when he was 49 and I was 20.
Mm.
So that was quite a crisis, and there was a lot of things going on, and that kind of accelerated my sort of spiritual seeking period. But at the same time, you're living in the world, and you're going to see shows with friends, and you're drinking and going to parties and whatever else. So it was kind of an odd thing, because on the one hand, I had this side of myself, but on the other hand, I was just like everybody else, just having a good time, like every other 20-something kid was, you know? So that's the background there. Now, in my late 20s, I had a bit of a crisis. I decided to stop drinking, and that I managed for nearly 5 years. And that really accelerated change in my spiritual perspective. In 94, about a year into that period, so I should say I was born in 66. So in 94, I was 28, and had I could only call it a kind of a state of elevated consciousness. It came about, the trigger almost doesn't matter. What matters is that for about a month, I felt extremely aware of how people felt. I could almost tell by looking at them. It was as if, you know, you could see and look into somebody and see something that nobody else could. It was a heightened sensitivity. I realized, one of the crucial realizations I made at that point was that love and fear cannot coexist. This was a massive thing for me, and it wasn't an intellectual exercise to come up with that. It was a really distinct realization that if you're in fear, you cannot love. And that was something that has stayed with me the rest of my adult life. So, and it was funny because when I made that realization, a lot of doors started opening for me that had been closed before. It was as if, okay, you've realized this, now you can move on. This has been a block, something that you have that has been hindering your development, is that you were afraid of love, and you can't be afraid of love. And so love was the answer, and fear and love cannot coexist. So that became a kind of a guidepost, something that I always look back on and can say with certainty. So, yeah, I guess anything you want to add here?
Well, it's just very fascinating. I'm just thinking about you. You were 28 at that time?
I was 28, yes.
When you had that realization, and you were in the middle of your attempt to stop drinking, is that, or was that?
Yeah, I was a year in without drinking.
1 year into a 5-year
into a 5-year
program or whatever it was. I guess it was just self-directed.
Mostly, yeah.
Self-directed.
That first year, I actually did not go into any 12-step program. I did wind up going into a 12-step program for a couple of years. I found them, which was good for the 2 years, but it wasn't. I outgrew it.
Yeah.
I would say. But yeah, it was a year in. It was pretty much self-directed. Because you go through a lot of things when you stop like that. You stop, and I was, I've never been a kind of guy who drinks daily or anything like that. But when I would drink, I would drink hard, and what I realized was that there was a lot of I'd been stifling so much of who I was through this stuff. It's almost like, so in that year, and anyone who's quit a substance understands this, that when you stop it, there is this period where it's difficult. You could find yourself bawling for no apparent reason. There are emotions that you don't understand. And I think that this all sort of came to a head a year later when I had this experience, and then it changed me tremendously. It was a huge change for me.
Yeah, the whole issue of fear and love and sensitivity, all these sorts of things. I'll just tell a really brief anecdote from my own experience when I was in my early 20s, like very early 20s, maybe 21 or so. I can't remember. I took a lot of hashish at a party, an outdoor festival, musical festival, and then nothing was happening. I was completely inexperienced. My friends were more experienced than I was, but I'm very sensitive to any substance. So I ended up really tripping out for about 12 hours, hallucinating and extremely dehydrated and paranoid. And it was one of the most horrible things I've ever experienced. A lot of demonic imagery and just like full-on hallucinations. Like the next day I woke up after barely having slept, just wrestling with the demons all night long and losing the wrestling match, by the way. I was walking around trying to find some place to relieve myself, walking through the tall grass at this hippie party, and it was broad daylight, and I was thinking to myself, thank God that I survived the night. The hallucinations are over, and I feel horrible, obviously, like the worst hangover I've ever felt from nothing but pot, but and hashish. But I wasn't out of the woods yet, because there in the broad daylight, the bright sun shining, and the nice people enjoying their morning around me in the distance. But as I walked through this tall grass, it suddenly turned into a sea of snakes. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Like, this is 12 hours later or whatever it was. And why am I still hallucinating in the broad daylight? You know, it's one thing when you're in the dark. I was in my tent and I was just sort of tossing and turning. Like if you've ever had a bad fever, it's kind of that kind of feeling. And so from that point on, it took me, and I think I had done some mushrooms for the very first time, like the weekend before or something like that. Okay. And the mushroom trip was amazing. It was just like perfect. And it was very mild. And then the come down was so gentle and beautiful. It was like a totally amazing experience, but that may have opened something up. And I believe that drugs and even alcohol can be a gateway to the demons. That's what I believe as a Christian.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be, but I think that it can be, just like anything else can be, pornography or whatever. But my point here is I think I may open myself up. And for the next year, I was suffering from major panic attacks. And I had a doctor prescribe me some downers, which made me feel good, but I knew that I should not get addicted to this. So I only took them for the first few days, and I didn't take them anymore. I just said, I'm going to deal with this head on. So the whole issue, the reason I'm talking about this is because it's the issue of sensitivity and fear. I was very sensitive, very vulnerable, very raw. I felt everyone's emotions, like you said, and I felt everyone's motivations, rightly or wrongly. That I perceived that I felt like what they were going through. And I was very vulnerable, very teary, and very emotional. And that rawness, in a way, I miss it because it's so real. But in a way, I'm happy to be more comfortably numb now. But for a whole year, I was facing the issue of fear, and what allowed me to escape from the nightmare of panic attack and anxiety disorder, which it turns out I'm genetically predisposed to because I did a genetic health test voluntarily just to find out what's in my family background from my mother and my father's side. And I have a predisposition to these nervous disorders. So after a year of struggling with fear, I realized that it's only when you face the fear. When I had the courage to face the fear, because I had a dreaded fear of death at that time. I was agnostic, atheist, and I had a dreaded fear of death. But when I decided to face the fear out of just pure frustration and exhaustion of waking up 100 times a night with my heart pounding visibly out of my chest as a young man, 21-year-old man or whatever I was, when I got fed up and finally faced the fear disappeared like that. It was a moment of peace. There was calm in the storm, in the center of the storm. And I realized that this fear is an abstract fear of fear. And as soon as I learned that lesson, even though I could still get seduced into avoidance where I would not want to face the fear, I could still get seduced into that, but I would remind myself, no, you don't avoid, you face the fear. And I think that's what a lot of people have to learn. That's a hard lesson to learn. It took a year of my life, and it was very, very painful and draining, and I may have heart damage because of it. I don't know. God knows. But if people learn to face the abstract fear of fear, then they can have that freedom that we all crave. And I think it's connected, love, freedom, truth, just living in reality, not being insane. Because I was very insane. I still have tendencies toward being a little bit bizarre. But you gain experience in this life. You gain experience and you gain wisdom in terms of the basic fundamentals: fear, love, you know, these sorts of things. And I think that's a relevant story to what you're emphasizing in our talk.
Yes, it is very much so. And I think for me, you see, fear is really, in a sense, the root of all evil. I mean, in a sense, because if you look, I mean, you have people who are, who do bad, who do evil, right?
Yeah.
But evil prevails if people are in fear.
Even in the Garden of Eden, there's some interpreters of the Genesis story who say that Adam and Eve were sort of bullied into disobeying God and eating the fruit of the forbidden fruit of the tree, because the serpent was there. And when the serpent said, and I'm sure you and my listeners are familiar with this, when the serpent said, "You will surely not die if you eat the fruit," that was interpreted by some to mean that eat it, because if you eat it, you won't die. But if you don't eat it, you will die, because I'm here to enforce it. Like, you're going to eat it or I'm going to kill you, that kind of thing. I've never heard that interpretation until very recently. But it's interesting. It's interesting because it's that bullying technique that we see with some heavy-handed governments around the world. Over the past 2 years, we've seen sort of the mask come off, the friendly mask, like, we're here to help and we care for you and we love our citizens. We see the mask come off and we see the bold bullying and the coercion and the pressure of these various governments around the world. And sadly, and to my disappointment, a lot of people caved with just the very subtle hint of coercion, or a subtle promise of reward for conformity. And then as the pressure mounted and mounted and mounted, I was sad to watch the numbers. Like, those who said they would never take the vaccine, for example, that percentage kept shrinking. I was watching the numbers week after week, and the number kept shrinking. In Canada, I think it started out around 30%, and it's dwindled down now to around 15%, if I'm not mistaken. So the mounting pressure and the mounting bullying is just whittling away at people. And even those of us who have taken a hard stand, that we're not going to comply, right? So I think that bullying, and I think that pressure is exploiting exactly what you're talking about, the fear and the fact that people are not connected to something higher, something profound and something deep, and or they don't have a set of principles that guide them. And so they're able to be bullied, they're able to be coerced. And it could be something as simple as, well, do you like to travel? Well, if you want to travel, just comply. It's not hard, it's free. What could go wrong? It's safe and effective. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not really dramatic when you look case by case. Why did you comply? Why did you comply? Well, it's the little story makes a lot of sense. Well, I want to work, I want to feed my family, I want to travel, whatever it is. It doesn't seem dramatic when you look at it on a case by case basis, but when you step back and look at the progression, how people are just being corralled, and the outliers are slowly being gathered in little by little, and the net gets wider and wider and wider, until we had Monsieur Legault suggesting maybe there should be a tax on the unvaxxed and these sorts of things. And then he backed off a little bit. But no, this whole issue of fear, it's very important.
It's crucial. We are ruled through fear, and fear in ways that, on the one hand, everyone thinks of totalitarianism as a, jackboot. But in fact, there's been a conditioning process going on that is far more subtle. It's been going on for decades. And that conditioning process is always like, fear of, fear of missing out, there's always these things like, if I, you see it in almost every aspect of our lives, like, fear of making a mistake. Now, I'm an IT guy, and one of the things I learned very fast was that in IT, you have to learn from your mistakes. And you can't be afraid to do something because you're going to make a mistake. Then because the only way you're going to be a good technician in IT is if you actually you go, okay, I made a mistake, and then move on. But it's just generally, it's so pervasive. I can't really, it's so pervasive. It's not possible. And it's not possible for this to have happened in the last 2 years if I mean, I watched people overnight, just when they weren't afraid prior to the government declaring a pandemic and declaring lockdowns. They weren't afraid then. There were people in my office who had colds, severe colds, like a week before it all started. And I wasn't like, oh, it's not a problem. But it was as if a program had been switched on.
Yeah.
And then everyone just started to run with it. Mm. And I'll tell you now, we're getting back to where we started in a way. So I was a very early, I describe it as being almost like in a virtual trench for the last 2 years, because myself and a friend of mine, we were very much, we'd been aware that they'd been trying to create pandemic fear for at least 10 years. And, then we watched, we saw certain signs, and we're like, I remember Netflix had just released, they had just got the right to release Contagion.
Okay.
And so Contagion, I think, was released on Netflix at the end of January. Now, this is a movie from several years ago, but I've never seen it, by the way. But I saw that it had been released, and I'm like, oops, that's a sign that they're psychologically preparing us now. Like this movie Contagion coming out on Netflix is sort of like, it's activating people. It's there to activate people into that mindset. And in fact, I'm told that the film is very close to what actually happened. The narrative is very close to the narrative that we've been living with, that was used to to bring in support for all the measures and everything. Mm. Now, the thing is, I have to tell you that in April of 2020, as I watched all this, and I was never afraid of the virus, never. In fact, by May, I was even wondering, what viruses are. But I remember for the first 2 weeks, I was alone. I had never left my block except to go to the store. And the store where I go to, the Marché, is very close. And then a friend of mine was like, one night says, come on down, man. Like, we're just hanging out here. And so I went and I walked. It was a Friday night. And I live in the Plateau, and I walk along Roy to Saint Laurent. As I pass Saint Denis, so I passed Saint Denis, and then I hit Saint Laurent. And I was stunned. I felt like now I could see, it was as if a hand had just like changed the whole world around me. Friday night, it felt like Sunday, 5 a.m. It was just like there was hardly anybody around. And I remember walking in and seeing my two friends at the time, and they could see in my face that I was shocked. I was in shock as to what was happening. And it was my first time out. I've never been isolated for 2 weeks in my life. But there I had been isolated. Then I'm seeing people. And over the course of that month, I remember saying, I can understand how people, because I've been very much, I've had 2 friends of mine who committed suicide, and brutal stories, both of them. And I've been very much against suicide. Like, I don't blame them. I don't resent them for having taken their lives, but I made up my mind, like, that this is never going to be an option for me ever.
Good.
And yet I felt for several weeks in April that I was never going to do it, but how it could happen.
Yeah.
Because there was a sense of pointlessness, hopelessness, despair, confusion. Nothing seemed to make sense. And I remember that there were certain people I was following, and my own sort of understanding of my spirituality and what that meant. But basically, after a few years of really not exploring that aspect of myself, it was activated by the summer. And one of the things was like I had to go through this process where I had to identify what I thought was wrong with what was going on around me. And the first thing I realized was that it was anti-human, that ultimately the entire process of lockdowns, and it had activated a psychological state in people where they believed that just for being alive and healthy made you a threat to somebody else. Like to me, this was diabolical.
Yeah.
That you could create a psychological state in the masses that made them individuals afraid of each other. This was the height of fear. This is like, and so right away I was like, okay, so the question now is, this is anti-human. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? I remember taking a course when I was at Concordia. I took a religious studies course with a guy named Oppenheim, and it was the theme of it was a study of religious autobiography. So we studied
Saint Augustine.
Saint Augustine. We studied Malcolm X. We studied who else? Kierkegaard, who I had a fondness for through most of my 20s. And the primary theme was, what does it mean to be human? So basically, it was religious autobiography. We're reading all these on Sartre. I did a paper on Sartre as well, the emo.
Nice.
Excuse me. And I wound up back to that question again.
Yeah.
To really think about what it means to be human. And then I realized it's very simple. Whatever they're trying to stop us from doing is a good sign of what it means to be human. So if they're telling us we can't see each other, then what it means to be human is to be in communion with others.
Face to face.
Because the thing is that there's a process of like so much has been inverted, right? Yeah. So people have this idea that that life doesn't come with risk.
Yeah.
And so they're afraid. And that was the other thing. It's like, what does it mean to be human? I mean, obviously that you're not going to come up with an answer to that question in one sentence. It is books written on this. But one of the things was that I noticed, okay, if they're locking us down, it means that we should not be locked down, and that what it means to be human is to be free.
Yep.
And people could say, well, you can't be free at the expense of others. It's not it, but the whole notion that people are a threat to each other when they're healthy is just so diabolical. I had no words for it.
Yeah.
So this then by late spring, I was starting to come to an understanding of what was important, what was the best way to react, to be in this situation. And what I realized was that despair was my enemy.
Yeah.
Despair is our enemy. It is our enemy. Despair is a failure of imagination. Now, we all feel despair. I felt despair since then. But despair, when you're in it, you cannot see. In fact, your imagination is hindered because you cannot see a way out. It's all bad. It's all bad. It's all bad. But if you are not in despair, then you have a better chance to get yourself out of the pit. We talk about the pit of despair. It's a pit because you cannot see anywhere. And if you're in a pit, you're looking straight up, but you don't see this. You have a very limited view. So this was a big thing for me. And my friend Jen, she'd watched as I was, because there was such an inclination to go, what the heck? These people are trying to take over the world. But honestly, by the summer of 2020, there was no government that was going to make me unhappy with their decisions, because nothing. I knew at that point that they would do whatever they were going to do. Yep. And my job was to defy them in my way, not to go around like being a problem for other people. Like some people say in our camp, they go into stores and they're very big on, like, I hate the masks as much as anybody, but I've been more or less compliant on that scale because I just don't want the trouble. My thing is that there is always a way to get around governments and their use of force. And when you give them too much power, and this is what despair, if you give them power, then you're taking away your own agency. And I think we're going to go back to that question of what does it mean to be human, it means to have agency. And I like that word because, I am an agent in my own life. Legault, Trudeau, they can't stop me from, they can't control me. And if I say, I'm going to respect the rules, even though they're against everything that I believe in, then what kind of person am I to myself? Like like in the end, what I realized was that it's the individual that matters. And this has been a huge shift for me as a guy who comes from a politically left background. I have always been a left-leaning. I think that changed over the last several years as I watched what was happening in the left. Essentially, but what I realized was that there had been a movement. It used to be that the left respected individual choice, but then they moved away from this. And at some point, it all became about the collective.
Yeah, conformity and compliance.
Conformity, and you could see this, and social media was enforcing this.
Yeah.
And so what happened in the summer of 2020 is, I started to actually do some deep dives into various religious traditions. Like my Bible came back out again. So I started to look at, not randomly, there were certain YouTubers or bit shooters, who were coming out with, various segments of the Bible that were relevant to what was going on. Those helped, even though I still, don't consider myself a Christian. But then I would start to take a look at aspects of Islam, and just sort of exploring the various, going back to what I thought was important, is to try to understand what we're going through, because I saw this as being like, I never thought this, I never saw an end to this. For me, there was an agenda. There is an agenda. And I realized that by spring of 2020, that our world is gone as we knew it. Like our world, the old world, no. Even if things went back to normal, which I'm quite convinced they're never going to go back to what we used to call normal. Yeah. What would have to happen is that people like you and me, and those of us that are resisting, would have to find our own way around this and create our own culture, in a sense, which is what we've been doing. There was no way that we were going to go back to just go watch the hockey game at the bar, hang out with friends. Yeah. It's all, now it all seems so 2019. It's really strange.
I don't feel envy when I walk. I'm not jealous or envious when I walk past a restaurant and I see all the vaxxed people sitting at their tables enjoying life as if they weren't being enslaved by tyrannical satanic baby killers, right? Like it's like the illusion is gone. The illusion is gone. I never was a fan of the sort of classic let's go holidaying, let's go to the restaurant, that sort of mainstream tourism of life kind of thing. I was never a fan of that. I was always more introspective and more on the otherworldly in terms of my introspection and stuff like that. But the way out of this for me, because I'm Christian, I have a very clear vision about the way out of this, and I want to bounce an idea off of you because you're an IT guy. If you think about, I'll just present sort of my vision using an analogy of virtual reality. I've got these headsets and you can go into a virtual reality and it's like, wow, it's so real and I'm getting lost and absorbed, and it seems like it's kind of like if you've done lucid dreaming where you're like, wow, I'm dreaming, but it's so real. It's more real than real. And our imaginations are very powerful in that way. And unfortunately, the demons have a lot of influence over our imagination. They can't control our will and they can't control our intellect, but they can stimulate our imagination. And that's why we have to be very careful about what we consume, what we look at. You know, like when there's a sexy woman revealing her cleavage, I'm tempted to look just because it's attractive. But at the same time, I know that the demons want to tempt me into, something that's disordered. I mean, I already have a wife. I don't need to seek another wife. I'm a monogamist, okay? So it's disordered. Not to say that her breasts aren't good and she's not a good person and all this sort of thing, but it's not my place, right? It's disordered. So there are a lot of good things that we're tempted to indulge in, like that third cookie or that second slice of cake or whatever it might be, or for you it might be another shot of whiskey or whatever. But we need to have moderation and balance. But the idea that I want to portray to you here has to do with virtual reality. So you enter into this world and it's a game, so to speak. Like you have to make choices and those choices have consequences. And we don't need to imagine the details of this world. We just need to know that it's virtual and that sitting next to you in real life at this higher level of reality, like you're standing in this room and standing next to you is the creator of this world. He created the technology, he created the software, he created the hardware, and he gave a lot of creative freedom to those who would sort of run that world within the game. And he lets bad things happen in the game. There's danger and these sorts of things. If you've ever played a video game, you know that every video game includes danger and choices that have consequences and these sorts of things, and rewards and pleasure and whatever. But the idea is, from my Christian perspective, the idea is that no matter how exciting it is in this virtual world, no matter how well you play or how poorly you play, or if you fall into temptation within that world, at one point in time, you're going to have that headset removed and you're going to be like, oh, yes, I remember now that there's this higher level of reality, this more fundamental level of reality. And there is a creator, and the creator is all good and he's all wise. And he's been watching me play. And I'm going to be judged. And so this Christian story has two elements to it that I want to emphasize with you. One is we're going to be judged, and so you better be loyal to the creator of this virtual reality. You better be loyal to him because he ultimately is your judge. And the other aspect is that there's nothing to fear, absolutely nothing to fear within that realm, that virtual realm, from the quote-unquote bad guys who are tempting you or making you fall into traps or hurting you or harming you in subtle ways or even in not subtle ways with the jackboot, like you said. So we have nothing to fear. That's what Christ says in the New Testament time and time again. Fear not, fear not, fear not, constantly. To his own disciples and, even to St. Peter, fear not. And Peter said, let me walk on the water. He walked on the water, but then he looked at the waves and he got afraid and he fell into the sea. And he reached out and Jesus saved him but it's only because he took his eyes off the Lord that he fell into fear. So fear not. That's the first thing I want to emphasize with this virtual reality thing. And the other thing is, it's just temporary. This is a lower level of reality and we shouldn't get too excited about the good stuff or about the bad stuff. So I want to get your reflection on that as an IT guy and as a spiritual seeker.
Well, okay, so I don't play video games, never have.
No?
No, never have. When I got into computers, I thought that was the game. Just learning computers, like learning how they work. And so I've never played video games. But I will say this, that, there's a lot to unpack there, but because I'm not sure, if I may ask for more clarification, the VR, are you suggesting that the VR is like an analogy for real life?
Yeah, like what you and I consider normal life, like we have our job and we have our life and it's all real, but it's a lower level of reality. The higher level of reality is God and heaven, and we're going to have glorified bodies in heaven. Like this is the Christian perspective. Okay, we're going to have glorified body. There's going to be a new heaven, a new earth, and there'll be no more pain, no more suffering, no more misery, no more any of the bad stuff for those of us who make it to heaven. And in hell, it's just it's just the complete lack of everything that's good. No justice, no peace, no joy, no love, no life. I mean, it's just a constant death without ever having the relief of annihilation. You're just constantly dying that death, which is horrible, and the anguish and despair, and the, you talk about that pit of despair. That's what hell is like. Plus with the physical suffering, which is sort of a secondary pain. The main pain is like, oh my God, I will never enjoy God and all of his goods, because he is the source of every good: life, beauty, goodness, balance, and everything that's wholesome, and everything that we value. Pleasure.
See, I think there's okay, so VR. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, when I think about VR, you see when you say that, for me, I keep thinking about how what they want to do is take us away from what is real.
Yeah. Well, there are many layers of reality, right?
There are indeed, but this VR technology is just an outgrowth of what has been going on, in the sense that there's a synthetic layer that has been created, where why not just enjoy being in the world? Like,
I know what you're saying. You're talking about the escapism to this idealized utopian fake world where everything can be controlled and you can cater to all your desires, and I could have a million at my fingertips, everything that's pleasurable for me, like in this virtual world, but it's not real.
It's not real. And the thing is that it takes us away from what is.
Yeah.
People who are heavily into, and this is one of the big problems that happen with the lockdowns, is that then we're living in two-dimensional synthetic worlds.
Yeah.
Whether it's on social media, whether it's in video games that you're playing,
Yeah.
because now you can't. So this is what they want. Now, I'm not a Christian anymore. I used to think, in a sense, I would have called myself maybe a Christian before, but I've got issues with monotheism and the Abrahamic religions in general that has arisen as a result of the last 2 years. I would have to say that the last 2 years has been a change there. But what I see is that we're constantly, they're trying to interfere with our humanity. And all these distractions that come around, like whether it's now Ukraine, yesterday COVID, and whether it's the violence that people, violent movies, whether pornography, all these things, what they're there to do is interfere with our. Because you see, I think that I don't believe in heaven or hell either.
Yeah.
So the thing is, for me, is that what matters, but I do believe in reincarnation. I think that's part of the. I think hell is really something that we make ourselves in life, and yeah, I mean, and I think that what we need to do as a humanity, what we need to get away from these elements that want to take us away from who we are, and to again, it comes down to, like, our lives aren't good enough. We have to augment them. Like, that was remember the Pokemon thing?
Yeah,
remember?
yeah.
I found that very bizarre. I was very disturbed by that.
Yeah.
Because here were people looking for things that don't exist. And they were looking, and they were everywhere. You go into places, like, oh, you find this. Oh, I found that very disturbing.
Yeah.
Because again, you see, they want us. It's to take away our living on this planet. To have an overlay, a Pokemon overlay, is bizarre, and I think wrong. Frankly, I don't say it's immoral, just wrong. So. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know how far the VR thing. I don't know how, but I will say that I think that this overlay and this need to sort of, we should be thinking about transcending and transcendence.
Yeah.
In consciousness and in our, but now instead we get these neo gods, these tech people who create that overlay for us.
Right.
And now they're the new God.
Yeah. I want to talk about the Eastern religions, because you talked about reincarnation. And when I speak with adherents of Eastern religions, whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever, the ultimate question is there any difference between the worst case scenario and the best case scenario for any human that ever lived, right? And there are only two answers. Yes, there's a difference, or no, there's not. If there's no difference, then you can go down that rabbit hole of the dark path and your karma will be horrible, and eventually you'll end up back where you started, which is the one mind of what I would call God, what they would call the transcendent or whatever, that one mind, okay? Whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism, it's the same thing. Either we all leave the illusion and go back to the one reality, that transcendent reality, the one mind of God, or the voyage just continues indefinitely and you can get stuck in a rut that lasts sort of like an infinite number of lifetimes, and that could be your hell, right? So that's the ultimate fundamental question of your worldview. If you're thinking about where you stand in relation to the transcendent and these sorts of things, you should be asking yourself, is there any difference between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario? Like, is it just an exploration and all roads lead back to that one mind? Or could you really get seriously lost indefinitely down a dark path where your karma is bad? And I do believe in karma, where your karma is bad and you're just going to have to suffer and work through that, and you're sort of at that bottomless pit of despair and hopelessness and self-indulgent in the pleasures and the passions of this life, and you don't rise up to the liberation that is that transcendence that you're emphasizing in your worldview. So even if you don't believe in the Judeo-Christian version, or you don't believe in heaven and hell as it's characterized by non-Christians, right? Because we can sort of make a caricature of heaven and hell, but the ultimate question is there for each and every person, whether they're a Hindu, Scientologist, or atheist, agnostic. It doesn't matter. We all have the same fundamental dilemma. Like, does it matter? Do my choices matter? Ultimately, will the outcome be any different, or is it just an interesting path? And every path is interesting. Every path is different. And we have to explore. It's almost like a moral obligation. I have to explore the dark side. I have to, not me personally, but one of us probably will. There's so many humans, right? Especially if you believe in reincarnation. You believe that there are many, many incarnations, many opportunities to explore the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So I'd like you to sort of reflect on that sort of ad lib. How do you respond to that challenge? Really, it's a challenge to face the music. Like, ultimately, does it make any difference?
It does make a difference. I think long ago I came to the conclusion that what really matters is what we bring to our life and what we bring to other people. Do I make people's life a misery? If I do, there's something wrong. Do I enrich people's lives by being alive and being who I am? And if I am doing that, then that matters. That's important. So I don't believe in heaven or hell. I'm inclined to believe in reincarnation. But what I do now is what I do now. Yeah. I can't, and it doesn't require me to believe in a God. I mean, I would tend to be more, I believe, for me, the God now, I would say, like Mother Earth is more like my God, the planet. This is an amazing planet. It's an incredible planet. And the Sun, Moon, Earth system is incredible. It is, and what matters is that I am alive, that I bring something to the table, and I am not.
Hello. Can you hear me? It froze. If you can hear me.
Have I lost my internet?
Yeah. Oh, here we go. You're back.
Okay. I don't. Yeah, that was weird. Is it your connection that went or mine?
No. I got a rock solid connection. Probably just a little glitch in the system. Don't worry about it.
So that's what matters to me. Now, what happens after
Yeah.
I die? That is something I can't know. And I was never interested, say, when I did look into reincarnation, I was never really interested in knowing, oh, what was I in a past life or something like that. That was
Okay.
very popular with some New Age folks. And I've never been a New Age guy, never. Um, and, you know, I've floated in New Age circles. I've known my share of pagans and witches and whatever else, I guess. But we can't know that. What matters is how well I live this life and how am I with people. Now, in terms of getting off, like a part of me is like, you know, say, like I was saying this, like if I'm reborn again on this planet, I shudder what I would be born into. So my goal would be not to be born again on this planet, not at the planet, at least as it existed, as it's going. But I'm fascinated by what could be. Like, you know, do I wind up in some, you know, if I don't get born again on this planet, do I wind up in some higher level plane, which you might call heaven? You see, in a lot of ways, I think my studies around different religions, because as somebody who was, you know, indoctrinated into the Catholic Church, I was just interested as I got older in exploring how and realizing that there are all kinds of different views about what comes after life. I am not an atheist. I don't believe that there's nothing, because I think that I like the idea, you know, that we are a signal. Our consciousness is a signal, and our bodies are the receivers of that signal. And I like this idea that consciousness it transcends our bodies. So I'm not an atheist, never have been, because I do believe in a higher power. But what that is, I mean, the closest now, I mean, I can say is that I believe it's the Earth. I believe the Earth is our, I mean, what a wonderful planet we live on.
What about the existentialists? Because you mentioned Sartre. What do you think about? Because it sounds to me like you are an existentialist. Like you have your existence, but you haven't determined your essence. That's existentialism in a nutshell. And it's up to you to determine your essence with your choices. Huh?
What is essence?
Well, yeah, that's the existential quest, right? What is essence? And so the existentialists, I don't know if you studied them or if you like them, but you sound to me like you're very much an existentialist in terms of meaning is up for grabs. And also there's a stoic element where, you know, we strive for goodness sake, and there's not necessarily an absolute objective meaning, but we impose meaning by an act of the will. So that there's that stoicism and existentialism. That seems like your sort of your
I guess
pathway.
I'm closer to that. If you were to put me in that, I think I read Kierkegaard. I read a lot of Kierkegaard in my 20s. And Kierkegaard was considered like a pre-existentialist.
Yeah.
And he was a Christian existentialist. So that's an interesting thing with existentialism. I did read some Sartre, but the one I remember, the one I read was Les Mots, the words. Okay. And it was just about, I like this idea that our lives are about being creative, that there's a creativity, that essentially we are writing our own story. And this is what I believe that's really important. I mean, is that we write our own story. But beyond that, it's, you know, everything else is up for grabs. You know, I mean, there's no way I can say, you know, like I've never been comfortable with this idea that, okay, I'm a Christian and I don't believe what the Buddhists say or the Gnostics say, or, you know, I believe that the human story is it's the exploration of that. And I don't think we can, I can't myself personally cannot limit myself to one story in terms of like a story that I believe in.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm inclined to believe or disbelieve one story over another, maybe, but I'm not 100% in.
I want to do a little thought experiment where you can talk about someone that you despise, someone in the history books. The big name that usually comes up is Hitler. I don't know if you want to use him, but use someone that you think is despicable, unhappy, miserable, and selfish, and it was a
Fauci.
bad path.
That guy is an evil guy.
Okay.
I mean, because the thing is, we have a lot of information on him. We have more information on him than we have on most.
So in spiritual terms, just talk me through, why is that path, in your opinion, a bad path? It's the wrong way to go. And if a child came to you and said, hey, I'm thinking of living this type of life and making these type of choices, why you would say, no, that will not bring you lasting happiness. What is it about Fauci and his choices that he made? Can you just sort of use that as an example to sort of explain to me and the listeners, what is the difference between good choices and bad choices in your point of view?
Well, they're all good choices for Fauci.
Okay.
But they cost tens of thousands of lives. It's not even a matter of good choices for him or bad choices for him. What makes him a bad person is that he has knowingly made decisions that cost the lives of tens of thousands of people. This is going back to AIDS.
Yeah.
And he's only out for himself. He is, in fact, the epitome of an anti-science. It's not a word I like to use, but when you defy all scientific protocols to get approval for drugs that you know are going to kill people, I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that, in my opinion. This is a contemporary situation. And so, you see, like, I believe in a simple precept: do no harm. Now, this is what Google used to claim: do no harm, or whatever. But do no harm. Do not harm people. I don't care if you're religious or not, or if you're an atheist. But if you think it's okay to harm people, and then you do it with impunity, and you do it again and again, well, you're a criminal mind. And so I do believe in morals. I believe in absolute morals in this respect. And when you harm people, you are doing something bad. But of course, he's enriched himself. He's enriched his friends to the tunes of millions and millions of dollars in their pockets, like in their personal pockets. So does that come close to answering your question?
No, it doesn't satisfy me, because, I mean, what I would need from you is some sort of explanation why the pleasures of getting rich at the expense of your slaves or your chattel or whatever it is, why those pleasures do not justify, why those ends do not justify the means. Like, if you were to be a selfish seeker of your own pleasures, and you are successful, I'm not saying this is possible even in theory, but for the sake of a thought experiment, if someone to be completely selfish and go for every pleasure using all the slimy, manipulative tactics and lies and deception and the media and big science, big tech, everything at your disposal, because you have the power, you have the money, and you can make everything happen so that you get everything that you think that you want, meaning goods of the, material goods and pleasures and of different sorts, and travel and everything else, sex. What I'm hoping to get from you is some sort of philosophical principle that says that the ends, all those good things, all those pleasures, do not justify the means, the lying, the cheating, and the stealing. Like, what is your philosophical principle that would say you can't do it? I know it's a lot of fun, but just don't do it. And if you just say, well, because it harms other people, that doesn't satisfy me, because he doesn't care about other people. What he wants is these pleasures and these goods, and that's what he gets. So when you point out to him that, oh, you're doing it at the expense of other people, he's like, yeah, that's how I get it. That's my pathway. That's how I get what I want, right? So you need to go beyond that to a principle So just what comes to mind for you?
Give me an example for you, you give
Okay,
me an
well,
example.
the example, you're not going to like it, but the principle is that if you are selfish, then there is such a thing as objective and absolute eternal morality and justice, and not only that, but judgment, and there are consequences, eternal consequences. This is why it always comes back to heaven and hell. So, I mean, from a Christian or Jewish or Muslim perspective, we have justice, perfect justice being meted out ultimately. But for everyone else, including those who belong to Eastern religions, there is no justice absolutely. There's only the game and the manipulation in this messy world of illusion. And there's no justice, especially if you're an atheist, which you're not. But if you're an atheist, there is 0% probability of ever having justice, because it's already in the history books that bad people got away with doing bad things, right? But from a Christian, Muslim, or Jewish perspective, we say, no. It looks like, from a human perspective, it looks like the bad guys got away with it and they had all the money, all the women, all the pleasure. It looks like that, yes, but no. There's a transcendent, higher reality in which justice is served, and those people either had to suffer some sort of purgation and purgatory and repentance and contrition, and then they made it to heaven, or they didn't repent and they just are suffering in hell, and their justice is served in that way. So that's why I'm sort of pressing this issue of heaven and hell with you, because it's very, very important for morality.
I understand. This is interesting because you can tell that I've strayed away from that position, because I don't believe that morality is something that comes from, like, I do believe, the old expression, karma's a bitch.
Yeah.
I do believe that, I certainly like to believe that Fauci will get, if there is a God and there is heaven and there is hell, oh mine, I would hope that Fauci really gets his just desserts in the next life, wherever that happens to be. But I don't believe it necessarily. I do think that if there is another life out there that he's born into, and I hope he is born into a life of really, I really have to say, I wish him ill. I do wish him ill. But I can't go much more than that. I mean, he's a bad person. We have evidence of all his wrongdoing. He has gotten away with it. He's over 80 years old now, right? This old guy.
Yeah, he looks
he's
good.
Over 80. Sorry?
He looks good.
He looks pretty good. Yeah, I wonder how he managed to do that.
The portrait of Dorian Gray.
Yeah. I mean, for somebody who's 81 or 82 or something, I mean, he's doing okay. Obviously, there's nothing in this life now there's nothing that can really happen to him. He'll die a rich man. He'll get all the accolades in the media as being this fine person who has overseen the complete health disaster of the United States, as he's the health czar of the United States. So yeah, in a sense, I would like to believe that there is justice out there after this life, and that whether it's heaven or whether it's being born into a terrible life in the next life he might have, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. For me, people like that, they're sociopathic. You want them to be punished. You do. I've never felt more like, honestly, with Fauci, I was very strongly against capital punishment, because I don't believe it's up to us to mete out justice in that way by taking someone's life. I do not believe that, and haven't most of my life. In fact, when I was in high school, I wrote a whole paper on this thing that my English teacher was very impressed with. I remember, because it was like strongly against capital punishment. But I have to say, a guy like Fauci, I'd like to see him on the dock. I'd like to see him suffer and get justice, but it's a fool's game. We can't really go there.
Yeah. One thing I want to say with that, if you've read the Psalms, King David wrote the Psalms, most of them, I think, maybe all of them, but a lot of imagery of David praying to God to punish his enemies and make them suffer and die and whatever. And, it's a bit shocking. It's a little bit off-putting from a Christian perspective, because Jesus said that's the pagan sort of way, wishing ill on your enemies. We have to love our enemies, and to love them means not that you admire them or that you like them or that you have good chemistry with them. Far from it. They're repulsive, right? But that you wish them well. You want them to repent. You want them to go back to the Father, God the Father, and to repent and to change their ways by the grace of God and to go to heaven. So as a Christian, the idea of ill will is the most repugnant to me. Like when you say you have ill will towards Fauci, that's like a red flag. It's like danger, danger, danger. You should never have ill will towards any human being or any creature whatsoever.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
But I also understand reading the Psalms of King David, like it's a very natural thing. And even Jesus Christ himself, while walking on the earth, he had enemies, and he was very aggressive in his condemnation of his enemies, calling them hypocrites and a pit of vipers and all these sorts of things. So yes, you have to be passionate. You have to hate evil. You have to hate sin. And I admire you for that. I want you to love the sinner, hate the sin. And if possible, never have genuine ill will towards anyone.
Fauci was a big one for me. But, I want to shift things a little bit, because I've just finished. Are you familiar with C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, of course. Love it.
Okay.
Love him,
So
yeah.
Do you know the Space Trilogy?
No.
Okay, so the Space Trilogy is Out of the Silent Planet, sometimes called Voyage to Venus, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. So I just finished reading That Hideous Strength.
Okay.
And I would suggest anyone read that book to understand what is going on today.
Really?
Because it's surprising, actually. Because essentially what it is there's a small group of people who are understanding that there's a big battle going on, and the battle is taking place in some part of England, like not too far from London. And there's a big battle going on. Most people aren't aware of it. So it's known to the people involved. And on the one side, you have a group called the NICE, and it's an acronym for something, which is essentially a technocratic group of people. They have no belief in a higher. Well, they have a belief in the darkness, and that's the thing, is that they have a belief in controlling people and in controlling situations, and they're led by a handful of people, and then you have this other group of people who are fighting it, and their leader is a guy who's been to Venus and has been to Mars. He was kidnapped. This is a story. And he came in touch with extraplanetary beings called Eldils. Now, the reason I bring it up is because this idea of punishment, in the context of that book, it comes in this life for these people. And there's this incredible scene in the last, in the sort of near the end of the story, where the good guys really mete out the punishment is met out, and Merlin comes into it. So Merlin is involved, and C.S. Lewis was a major Christian thinker, right?
Yeah.
And I've always liked C.S. Lewis. I read that series long ago, back when I was back in the 90s. I read it, and so it's interesting. His approach to punishment wasn't even as a Christian, it didn't come. The battle came, but it wasn't in heaven. The battle came on earth, and those who lost the battle suffered on earth for their deeds. And now to shift it again, because I want to talk. I mean, I find it interesting. I've listened to your podcasts listened to 3 of your interviewees, and I'm interested in, because I'm at a stage now. See, I've always believed. I had a friend, my friend Alan Euster. He was a staunch atheist. I used to call him. He'd get upset when I used to call him a fundamentalist atheist. So this is a Dawkins atheist. I have no time at all for that position, and no time at all for Dawkins. Never have. And of course, one of the things I've noticed with all, and I've known a lot of atheists. Some people just don't have a position on the matter. I've been always interested in people who do have a position in the matter, whether they're atheists or not. I like that. And he would get mad. He'd say, like, it's a contradiction in terms. I'm like, no, because you are a firm believer in that God does not exist, but you can't prove that. You say, I can't prove it yet. And he'd say, well, anyways, you're an agnostic. It's a cop out, right? Now I keep saying it's a philosophical agnostic. Now that just means that I'm not going to be able to prove the existence or non-existence of a deity, whatever that deity happens to be. But the interesting thing with C.S. Lewis is when I was reading this, and it was, how familiar are you with the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nagamadi Library?
Not terribly familiar.
Do you know anything? Do you know any?
I just know it's Gnostic. I just know it's Gnostic, allegedly.
The Nagamadi Library is Gnostic. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not Gnostic.
Okay.
But it's a very interesting thing, and this is where I love history. Okay, yeah. I'm a big history buff, as well as a guy who likes to think about these larger questions. But in 1945, the Nagamadi Library, which is the oldest bound books that we know to exist. So these are not scrolls; these were codices, and so they're bound. So these were found in 1945, and in 1947, it was announced that these things had been found. So for 2 years, no one knew they existed apart from those who found it, and then it's announced in 47. Important year, by the way, 1947. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls were found at Qumran in 1947. Now, these present two very different pictures of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you could hardly call them, in some respects, they're Christian, but we're looking at such an early Christianity, it'd be more accurate, I think, to call the Dead Sea Scrolls, from what I understand, a radical Jewish sect.
Essenes, maybe?
That used to be the thinking was, but I think that I'm not sure that is a foregone conclusion at this point. But yes, it has been suggested that they were Essenes. But these were very, I mean, you look at the War Scroll. There was a very, very, very strict, very, very rule-based group of people, and there's a guy, what's his name again? There was one of them believed that they were a mushroom cult, essentially, that the early Christians were a mushroom cult, and there's some suggestion of that. But they were very stringent, very, very stringent, very, very rule-based. And the Nagamadi Library, those were Gnostics. Okay. This was Christian. This was Gnosticism. Now, some said it was Christian Gnosticism, but some believe that in fact they were kind of misleadingly called the Gnostic Gospels.
Okay.
Because they do have these things like the Gospel, the Apocrypha of Thomas or the Apocrypha of John, but they tell a very different story about the origin of humanity and the origin of the planet. And I started to think a lot about what, so I'm also an astrologer, right? So I've studied astrology most of my adult life. I've also been into astronomy, and I have several telescopes, and I had been regularly observing from my balcony in the city over the course of the last 4 years. And So the thing is here, and this is where the Catholic verses
Mm.
thing is going to come into it, and this is what I wanted to discuss with you. One of the interesting things is if you look at monotheism,
Mm.
you look at specifically when Zoroastrianism is not Abrahamic, and it doesn't really exist the way the Abrahamic religions do now. But one of the things that we have to ask ourselves, I did this over the course, I've been doing this for the course of the last 2 years, is that this is a very specific region of the planet where these religions emerge, right? So Judaism, Judaism is basically, because we think of being Jewish as being an ethnic thing, but it's not ethnic. It's a Semitic peoples. It's a linguistic designation. And if you look at whether you're Arab or whether you're Jewish, you're the same people. You come from that same region of the world, and Jews were part of that ethnic group. Yes.
Yeah. Well, even the Gentiles or the non-Jews, they came from that region too, because you have to understand from my traditional Christian perspective, and I'm not sort of buying into the modern worldly readjustment, right? Where, Darwin comes along and teaches us about the 14 billion year old universe and all that sort of thing. I believe that the universe is about 7,000 years old, right? So,
You really?
yeah. I'm a young Earth creationist. So I think the whole universe is.
Are you?
Yeah, I think the whole universe is not more than 8,000 years old.
See, yeah. Well, I have a completely different perspective on that. But it's interesting. I mean, I've never really, I didn't quite realize that.
And I've studied physics. I worked at the Canadian Space Agency. Like, I have lots of, I understand the mountains of evidence that people use to justify the age of the Earth, the age of the universe. I understand it. I just don't believe it, right?
You don't have to. I mean, we don't have to believe that. But no, I think we're looking at an eternal. I mean, the Earth not, but the universe.
The reason I bring it up in this context is because the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people both come from a very specific region in the Middle East, right? That's my perspective, and so it doesn't surprise me that we have a lot of focus on the Middle East.
Yes, of course. Well, the Middle East is the Levant, but the thing is that so then when you have Christianity, right? So Christianity emerges as an independent sect, independent of Jewish law, and eventually is part of the Roman Empire.
We would say the fulfillment of Judaism. The fulfillment of
You could
Judaism.
say that, yeah, I guess. I mean, if you're a Christian, you might say that.
That's what we say.
You would say the fulfillment, yeah. And of course, some Muslims might think that they're the fulfillment of Judaism and Christianity, because they believe that they're coming from
the true Abrahamic religion without corruption and without the perversion and rewriting and editing of the Jews and Christians.
That's right.
That's their take.
But the thing is that in that region and all over the world, all over Europe, what do I notice with these religions, well, specifically Christianity and Islam, is they're hell-bent on destroying the beliefs of those they conquer. They conquer them to impose their beliefs on people. Now, this is something I always struggled with, because I never believed that religion is the root of all evil. Like as Dawkins would put it. That's so simplistic as to be laughable. Now, I have to be clear here that I don't believe. See, I don't have a problem whether somebody is a practicing Jew, whether someone's a practicing Christian, whether somebody is a practicing Muslim. I admire people who are imbued somewhat, but they're with a kind of sense of like there's something greater than themselves. I think it's very important. But these religions were used as a way to conquer people and to obliterate their beliefs. And this really bugs me. If you look at, and it happened in Europe. So Europe was mostly pagan, Gnostic. In fact, if you look at, the great, the Greeks, Romans, all pagan, all highly advanced civilizations. the Egyptians as well, highly advanced. And then in Europe, you also had a form of paganism. The European Gnostics were a thing, obliterated. Then when the Europeans had their own beliefs obliterated by, and this was and the Christianity in the Europe, it was the Roman Empire, when it is essentially what happened with the Roman Empire was in decline, and in that decline, Christianity comes along. It's ideal. Now, I believe monotheistic religions are ideal for conquerors. They're ideal to be used by conquerors, because it's this idea that you have this one God who is sitting in judgment, and then you have a human representative of that God. The Pope is a human representative of God on earth, right? That's how Catholics see it, as far as I've known most of my life. And I have a big problem with the institution. I love the smell, like walking into a Catholic church, and the art and the beauty there. And I think that,
the architecture.
I mean, I love all that.
You probably love the education system, the hospital system, and everything else that comes with the Catholic culture.
Well, I was born in a convent hospital in Glasgow. So it's very strong in my family, and so I can imagine my relatives would not be too impressed with a lot of the things I'd say. But my thing is that Christianity conquered Europe through the Roman Church, and it brutally suppressed the native traditions and native belief system of those areas. And then when the Europeans had been completely assimilated into the Catholic, Christian at the time, really, it was, then they sought out and they brutally destroyed native culture. And the Catholic Church was again a very important part of that. A lot of it is just, I think it's obviously about power, but it's very interesting that they feel that they have to destroy the traditions of the people who've been living there for thousands of years. Say, you may not believe that, but thousands of years, say for me. But we obliterate history. We obliterate the culture of these people, and now it's gone, or mostly gone. And it lives sort of, but it's like Gaelic, like the Gaelic language. Like my folks, my three grandparents and my father spoke Gaelic as their mother tongue.
Wow.
And so my father didn't learn English until he went to school at 5 years of age. And what they had to do there in Scotland was when the Gaelic-speaking Highlanders and Hebrideans, when they revolted against the state, against the idea that the 1745 was the Jacobin Rebellion, and they outlawed Gaelic to be. You could not. You could not teach people Gaelic. Of course, people learned Gaelic on their knee, but when schools came around, like the church could not do any Gaelic. So the Catholic Church, and then we're one of the few. There's 3 islands in Scotland that are Catholic islands, and one of my cousins, who's a nun, used to joke that the Reformation never got so far as these islands because they were so remote. But why? Why this need to suppress the culture of people? And this is something that, even though I have never been of the view that religion is the root of all evil, it has been used to great effect to conquer people and then to wipe out their traditions.
Yeah, I think about what I'm thinking about as you're speaking is the Old Testament sort of historical books where allegedly God commanded them to kill all not only the soldiers, but all the men, all the women, all the children, all the livestock of their enemies, okay, and to destroy their demonic temples and these sorts of things. So the interpretation of the scriptures is a very delicate topic. There are very, very, very few passages in the scriptures that are dogmatically defined. This is what it means, or this is the primary meaning, or this is a meaning that you have to take from it and you can't stray from this. There are very, very few passages in the Bible, Old Testament and New, that are defined and limited in that way. So we have a lot of freedom in terms of interpretation. And from my Christian perspective, we'll find out on Judgment Day the proper interpretation, the multi-layered and multifaceted reality behind that set of books and that set of ideas and words and recorded history, and which parts were poetry and which parts were exaggeration and which parts were just a concession. When things were attributed to God, for example, when Moses said that God allows divorce, and then Jesus comes along and says that was just a concession that was made by Moses because you're a stiff-necked people. There are all kinds of things like that that will be clarified where, oh, the Jews thought this was like directly from God as a unchanging moral commandment, and it turns out it was just a concession because you're stiff-necked. There could be all kinds of things like that that we'll find out on Judgment Day. So we can't really commit to an interpretation of most of the passages in Scripture. We just have to trust in God that He's all good, and that these horrifying images we have of violence in the Old Testament in particular, but there's some instances in the New Testament too that I can think of. For example, that couple that joined Christianity and they sold their property and they withhold some of the money that they were supposed to give to the church, and they were both killed by the Holy Spirit. There's some graphic images like that in the New Testament as well, but primarily in the Old Testament, these violent images of holy wars and conquering and these sorts of things. Paul was very violent toward the Christians themselves. And then, the reason I'm talking about the wiping out of nations and their idols and their people, men, women, children, and their livestock, I do believe that God is a jealous God, meaning that He wants His creatures to worship Him and Him alone, and God will not be mocked. And if you think it's cute to have your idol worship, your demonic idol worship, you're in for a nasty shock. That's my Christian perspective, and I think that's the monotheistic perspective across the board. I don't agree with Judaism, modern day Judaism, or modern day Islam. I think they're false religions. They just happen to worship the one true God. So I have a lot in common with them. But when it comes to that justice and the jealousy of God and how He is willing to wipe out nations and wipe out cultures and this sort of thing, it's not a deal breaker for me the way it is for you.
Yeah, it's an absolute deal breaker for me. And the thing is that it doesn't mean that I don't respect people who worship God in the Abrahamic sense.
Yeah.
But Yahweh, if you look the Old Testament, that's a nasty God as far as I'm concerned. But I love the stories. I do love the stories. I mean, I'm very aware of them. One of the things, like, my God, I wish I had my Bible here, but if you look at the one story that from the Old Testament that I've been going back to a lot. So there's certain things, certain themes in the Bible that I like to take, and I find them to be very useful in understanding what is going on. But the Tower of Babel has been a fascinating tale for me since I was a kid. Like, I grew up, I learned English and French at the same time. And my parents spoke Gaelic as a kind of code. When they didn't want my sister and I to understand what they were saying, they would speak in Gaelic. So I was very aware, unlike a lot of people who who are not born in Montreal and who are, in purely English-speaking environments, they don't think about language too much. But I had it from a young age. I was like, Gaelic, French, and English were around me. And Babel was fascinating. But now, if you look at that, so in the Tower of Babel, humans are creating this massive tower to reach the heavens, to try to attain God, in a sense. And they meant well. Like, they wanted to, they weren't, but the whole thing was that God decided, and in fact, it says we. In fact, it's very strange. There are various moments in the Old Testament where God is pluralized.
Yeah. Even the name of God, Elohim, is plural.
Yeah, that's right. And you'll see this, and I don't think this is an accident, but you might have a Bible handy, but it's something to the effect of like, if they can do this, there will be no end to what they can do together.
Yeah.
So then God confounded their tongues and spread them to the four corners of the earth. Now, we've been living a Babel moment for the last, I'd say, I pointed this out in 2015, I think it was, on one of my Facebook posts there, where I started to realize that a lot of people are speaking the same language, but are no longer understanding each other. I found that people were unable, they were losing their sense of how to understand each other and to sort of really try to understand. Instead, it was just like, you're saying the same things and you're saying completely different things at the same time. This is divide and conquer. The Tower of Babel for me is a story about how you divide and how you conquer. It's like the earliest divide and rule story. And I think that this is a problem that we have today, is that we are being divided, and we are being divided to the point where, like, our people like you and I come from we're on a particular side of this story that we're living through in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So we are in complete agreement with what is going on and our beliefs about what is going on. But these people who are on the other side of this story, and I don't like that. I mean, it's a shame that it has to boil down to a side, but in a lot of ways, it's like we're the kind of a hardcore set on one side, and there's another hardcore set on the other, and then there's the masses of people who are just trying to figure shit out and trying to get on with their lives. But
that's the 30, 40, 30 split, like they talk about. Kind
of like that, I mean, it's just inevitable, because, like, you want to enforce me to have something I don't want. Well, no, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they accuse us of what we accuse them of.
Yeah.
Right. But it's all inverted, right? So, and you see this, it's like, so that we can't even have a discussion with these people, because they're saying, like they don't think that not being able to walk your dog after 10 o'clock in the evening they don't think that that's a bad thing. They think it's the price of freedom. But what? How is a curfew going to help things? But they believe that it helps. And if you don't respect it, then you are a selfish person.
The person I was in Tim Hortons today, and I wore my mask right on my chin, so my mouth was exposed, my nose was exposed. And I saw people looking at me, even people that were sitting at the tables like 2 or 3 feet away from me, were like giving me dirty looks, but they were not wearing their mask because they're seated at the table, right? But they're giving me dirty looks like, why aren't you wearing your mask? So, I mean, it's just like the mental gymnastics you need to go through to be sitting there in a closed space without a mask and judging your brother who has the audacity to pull his mask down when he's 2 feet away from me, breathing the same air in the same enclosed space. Like the hypocrisy and the schizophrenia is palpable, and it's mind-boggling, and it should be waking a lot of people up, but it's not.
It's waking some up. I've noticed a change in certain people who were quite adamant about this being a real, threat, and that people wearing masks, standing up, were a threat to them. And now they're like, okay, this is getting out of hand. It's not going to wake up that hardcore 20% who are triple vaxxed, wear masks when they drive alone in the car, or while walking out in the street. Those people are lost to me. I mean, they can do that. I don't care. But it's ridiculous. But that's the thing. It's like, so the Old Testament, the Babel story for me is what we're living. We're living a kind of, like, I like that part. I like that story because I think it tells us a lot.
I think if you look at what Jesus said, he's very astonishing. A lot of times in the New Testament, you'll hear that the enemies of Christ were astonished by what he said. And one of the astonishing things that Jesus says in the New Testament is that I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And your enemy will be on your own household. It'll be father against son, mother against daughter, and so on and so forth. Okay?
Yeah.
So this, we need to bear in mind, Christianity and monotheism generally is not afraid of conflict. It's not afraid of division. And there is basically, as St. Augustine said, there are two cities characterized by two loves, the love of God unto contempt of self and the love of self unto contempt of God. You basically have to choose. That's the game. It's the only game in town. You're going to choose. Pick a side. You're on the side of good or you're on the side of not good, meaning evil, right?
Right.
You and I agree about that. We have our disagreements about monotheism and what that means, and if God's a bad guy or a good guy. I mean, if he's a bad guy, why would I worship him, right? But if you think he's a bad guy, obviously I'd recommend you don't worship him, because you should not worship evil. You know?
I don't think God's a bad guy at all. I just don't think that. It's really about people. It's not about God, in my opinion. Like,
Right.
There are good people who love God and are Jewish, Christian, or Muslim,
Yeah.
and there are bad people who think they love God, who are Jewish, Christian.
But
or
the point
Muslim.
I'm emphasizing with you is the fact that the monotheistic religions, primarily Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we are not shy to embrace the paradox that is God. And part of that paradox is the fact that God will, in fact, press the issue to encourage a choice. And it is a sword that divides. And it's aggressive, and it will divide a mother from a daughter and a father from a son, and right down to that level of the family unit. So it's a very aggressive pressure to pick a side. And so I personally am not shy of that. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable because it's so heavy. But I don't want to go back to a nice guy agnosticism where I just think, well, we're all just on our own journey and we'll all end up in a good place. And the most important thing is to, be nice to each other and this sort of thing. Why? I mean, why is that the most important thing? There has to be more. There has to be something that transcends this horizontal dimension of life. Even if there is reincarnation, it's still limited to the horizontal. I'm not saying this to chastise you and your current worldview. I'm just saying that I went through that nice guy agnosticism and the pantheism, and I don't know if you ever experienced pantheism. Maybe you sympathize with pantheism. I was a pantheist for a long time. It's a very gentle, nice worldview where all is one, and we should just be nice to each other and this sort of thing. And Jesus Christ obviously wants us to be nice to each other, to love each other, and even to the extent of dying for our enemies. But it's a more nuanced and complex issue when it comes to things like violence and a hard, aggressive, rebellious position where you're willing to go against what's intuitive, like the counterintuitive positions. If you read the lives of the saints, you'll be shocked and maybe horrified by the lengths that they went to follow Christ. And it's not without its own drama, its own danger, and its own it's edgy. It's edgy. Christianity is edgy. And if you've read C.S. Lewis, or if you've read Chesterton, they sort of, in very flowery and nice, easy to understand language, are able to convey that in a way that makes it a little bit more palatable, I think. Have you read the Narnia series?
I have not. I mean, I remember seeing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe on PBS years ago, but that was, but no, in fact, I always thought of it as a children's book, and I've been meaning to read it because I know there's much more to it than it being a children's book or a children's series.
I think you'll enjoy it.
I do enjoy C.S. Lewis, and I like the way, and he says some. I mean, he really is like he's my kind of Christian.
Yeah,
C.S. Lewis is definitely my kind of Christian. So you were saying that one of the things. Now, again, I'll say one of the problems I've had with what they call the new atheism has been that we're in this situation now because they believe that it's all about materialism, right?
Yeah.
It's all about, like, this is to me the crucial thing in our time right now, is that we have, like, if there's a line, it's not about, for me, about whether or not you're on the side of the Abrahamic religions, or whether you're a pantheist, or whether you're a pagan or Gnostic or whatever. That's not what matters to me. Is that you understand what it means to be human.
Yeah.
That you've come to at least that. That's what you're a young Earth creationist. I'm as far from that as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But
eternal material universe.
But for me, it's eternal. I mean, to me, and this is the thing. So the Big Bang. Okay, so I'm into cosmology. I've studied. Yeah. I've studied some astronomers, and I'm always big on dissenters. Whether I like Christian dissenters, people who are like, who are Christian but dissent from the church. I like people who are dissenters in science. So cosmology was very interesting. So, the prevailing cosmological theory is the Big Bang.
It's in trouble right now, by the way.
Oh, it's been in trouble for decades.
Yeah.
Believe me, I'm as any layperson could be involved in this story and understand that the whole thing. It's big problems. But it was devised initially, or conceived by a Belgian priest by the name of Georges Lemaitre, and Einstein liked it, so it went in with Einstein and became Big Bang. And I think it was Gamow who kind of formalized it. But what does it do? What they've done with the Big Bang theory is they created their own creation story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they're like, we're going to do our own creation story. And it took a Belgian priest, scientist, or mathematician, but priest nonetheless, and then they created, they had the creation ex nihilo. So this is like Aquinas, excuse me. So St. Thomas Aquinas was like, he was the one that developed this idea of creation ex nihilo. Like, this is like God creates something from nothing, right?
I wouldn't say he created that idea. That's it's in the Old Testament even. So
okay, yes, but I mean, he kind of formalized it.
Yeah.
St. Aquinas, he philosophically
fleshed it out.
Exactly. So then, all they've done in the Big Bang theory is just transfer that idea and made it about the universe, not the earth. And in fact, nowhere in the Bible, as I understand it, does it actually say God created the earth. It doesn't even say that. It's the water. First there was the water, there was darkness, and there was, but if you look at it, the Genesis, I love Genesis. I mean, I love the stories, right? Like, I do love the stories, or some of them. But what's happened is that in the 20th century is that what's worse about, say, a lot of this materialism and atheism is that they don't understand that they think they're free of the religion, but they are actually just worshiping a replacement that is trying to do the same thing. So my thing with that is that the real danger is not people who believe in who are practicing Christians, Muslims, or Jews, or whatever it happens to be. The problem is people who think they're free from that belief, but then apply it everywhere else. You mentioned Jesus. Talk about pitting brother versus brother, mother versus son, all this stuff. What's happened in our world today? What's happened is now we are being this battle. Is in fact being waged in households.
Yeah.
So now what they've done is that they've created their own little version of Armageddon, where these battles are taking place between mother and son, brother and brother, and it's not because of religion. It's because what they've done is that they've created their own religion, and they've elevated man to the point of being the creator. Like this idea or the government being, the church.
Yeah.
So now the governments can tell us whatever we want, they want us to do or not do.
Yeah.
So now they've just replaced the government, they replaced the church with the government. So now you have these people like Fauci, or like for some people worship him like as if he were Jesus. Oh yeah, I mean, you see the Fauci worship at one point was just and we're not only that, but we're no longer good enough as we were born.
Right.
We need
transhumanism.
We need synthetic interfaces,
augment reality.
So they want us to be chipped.
Yeah.
They want us to. So now, and this idea too is that my nose isn't good enough. I need, or my whatever. I need to do all these things to be better, and it's going to be surgery. And so now you have all these. We're no longer good enough as we are, and we are. And not only that, we can't get better by ourselves by adjusting our diet, not smoking, not drinking, or whatever. We have to go to external sources. We have to get pharmaceutical industry to I'm depressed. I need to be on antidepressants. Mm-hmm. So they're going to cure me of my. Mm-hmm. If you're depressed, I don't. If people want to go, I'm always. People can have their choices, but we have to start thinking that I think we can agree on this. That this is fundamentally the biggest problem we have right now is that I think that a lot of the principles of monotheism have just been merely transferred, like the worst aspects of it have just been transferred into a secular religion in which man can now elevate, and not just man, but only certain men and women,
elites,
can actually bring us out. So they are our saviors. They regard themselves, or they certainly like to portray themselves as the saviors of humanity.
The priesthood, the high priest, and all that.
Exactly. Now I've been watching in science, and science is basically the prevailing science. And so people talk, and I'm very much into science. I've also, I think you'll appreciate this, but I've also been a critic of evolutionary theory, neo-Darwinism, for a long time.
Just so stories, everything is just so story where everything is told in such a way that it fits. I mean, they're just making up a nice little story, right?
They make it a story, but it's also been used against us. They use it to, if you look at Spencer was the first one to start, and the eugenics arises out of all this, right?
Yeah. I don't think Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood, and all that.
All that. So this is where I have an alignment with my Christian friends. Is that my alignment there? Is that I do believe, because I think that the most important thing is I believe in humanity, and I don't believe that elites are going to save me and save us or save this planet. They have absolutely no interest in fact, they're trying to destroy us.
Yeah, and they're ignorant, in terms of natural science.
Well, they're not interested in science at all. They're interested in using science to control.
Yeah, but even the expert scientists have barely scratched the surface of what's knowable about our material universe. It's a joke. It's a complete joke.
Absolutely.
There's a complete hubris there that if we had even a little bit of humility in the natural sciences, we would gather knowledge and we would appreciate the knowledge that we have, knowing that there's always more to learn. And that we will have to adjust and readjust. This is the way natural science used to be done. With this sort of tentative, we'll adopt a model, and the model seems good enough for now, and we'll adjust it. And when it gets rigorous and codified and dogmatic, and it's protected by political interests and these sorts of things, and then you can't get a grant if you have a different opinion, then we've strayed from the scientific spirit completely.
Exactly, and this is something I've observed because of my interest in science, and specifically space sciences. And latterly, in the last 2 years, I've explored the biological sciences and looked at the Béchamp Pasteur controversy that happened in the mid-19th century. But if you want to really you want to look into stuff, like I believe, and I always believed that that for-profit science was always going to be dangerous. So if you have a financial stake in an outcome, a scientific outcome, there is no way that you can possibly get to scientific truth.
Yeah.
And so I'm very pleased to discover, though, as I've always known this, and so on the surface of it, you're like, okay, they're very skeptical about pharmaceutical science, very skeptical about a lot of medical science. Medical science does certain things very well.
Yeah.
But as soon as drugs come into it, it's usually a disaster. Always exceptions, but now what I was knowing the corruption inherent in for-profit science, my interest, I always thought astronomy was pure. To me, and then I remember when I was 20 years old, I bought A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking.
I hate that guy. Sorry. God forgive me. God forgive me. Couldn't stand the guy.
Stand him. And in fact, the book was just, it's incomprehensible. Now, at the time, I thought, well, I didn't like it. I thought it was, but at the same time, I could go, well, what do I know, right? I'm 20 years old. I don't know anything. I just go on. But the Big Bang stuff, all that stuff was just, I had a problem with the Big Bang at 11 years old, because it's like, I remember a friend of mine, Arnold Jelinčić was his name. I haven't seen him in many, many years, because he was from what was then called Yugoslavia, but he was Croatian. And I remember he and I were both into space. And when the Big Bang started to become a thing, when we were like in the mid 70s, when it was becoming like, it was in the mainstream, and we're like, what? What came before? Like, it inevitably has to go down to a God, right? To God, but it still didn't seem like a satisfying answer. Now, what happens to me is that I started to read, in the 90s, I started to read a guy named Arthur Kessler. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Yeah.
So I read The Sleepwalkers, and I read Ghost in the Machine, and I read The Act of Creation. And he had a fantastic critique of not just neo-Darwinism, or the synthetic theory, is the Darwinian synthetic theory, but also a critic of behaviorism. He was a staunch, because he was a communist who became anti-communist, right? Okay. So he was a Hungarian Jew who was a communist, and then he wrote a book called Darkness at Noon, which actually deals with his treatment that he had when he was no longer somebody that could be a communist. But this idea of behaviorism, and you start to see that in Kessler, I started to see, okay, so there are these people who are just trying to reduce us to stimulus response units, to just behavior. So they're trying to keep us down, because because what's happening is there's so much more to humanity than can you predict human behavior? Well, of course you can predict human behavior. But why would you? And of course, that question becomes a thing, because why would you? Well, look where we're at now. That's why. But the interesting thing is, I thought that cosmology would be a good pure, because there's no for-profit. There is no, it's just government grants and, stuff like that. And I was shocked to find out that some really high-profile astronomers and cosmologists, and these were, when I say there were scientific cosmologists, like not the cosmology that we knew, say, in Aquinas' time, but the modern cosmology. These were like guys like, famously Fred Hoyle, and also and his group. There was also this guy Halton Arp. Now, this is a group of people who were absolutely, it was Fred Hoyle that actually coined the phrase "the Big Bang," and he did it in that kind of derogatory sense. It's like, oh yeah, so there was nothing, and then poof, there was a Big Bang, and there was something. And he was an atheist, but he denied. He was a very strenuous critic of the Big Bang. And then Halton Arp was an astronomer who wound up getting into this thing. Now, into this controversy because he had made certain observations which contradicted the theory. And he fought his entire life. This is a guy, they call him a modern day Galileo because they had to deny him telescope time to shut him up. And even then they couldn't shut him up. So this was one of the top galactic astronomers in the United States. Now, he made an observation about quasars, and this goes to what I think and to, so quasars in the current theory. Have you heard about quasars? Do you know what they are?
Yeah. I used to play a video game on my Apple IIe called Quasars. Quasar. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah, it's a great name. It's quasi-stellar object. But basically, what happened in the early 63, they found these objects that were so distant, apparently, based on current assumptions, based on what the assumption of something called redshift was. They were so distant that we are looking into the early universe. Like we're looking almost like 13 billion light years. In fact, at the time, they thought it was a 6 billion year old universe. And then they found these things and like, oh, it must be 13 billion years old or whatever. But what was interesting was that what some of the dissenters are saying is that what is happening is that we are seeing these quasars are ejected from the center of the galaxies, like a seed. Like they're like baby galaxies. And and he showed just how he would refer to them not as black holes, but more as like white holes. Things are coming out of them, which is really more like what life is like about. Everything comes out of something, right? We're born out of our mother's womb. Everything, is you come out of an egg or whatever. There's something, we're always emerging out of something. That's life. Life emerges out of something. And I think that that's what's interesting. What I just, I don't know if I'm getting too far away from the original thing, but if I'm going to say we're talking about for-profit science versus not, what I discovered was that it's all corruptible. Where essentially everything is corrupted now in knowledge. Why? Why are they suppressing? Now, a lot of it is systemic. You create a system by which you can exclude dissenters. The peer review system, for instance, it's used to actually freeze out people who have different ideas about things. But there is a consistent tendency to want to obscure the truth. And I believe the truth is always provisional, but right now I can tell you that in my experience looking in science is that we have almost everything we need right now to create a better world for ourselves and our children. But that is being denied us. And I became curious as to why, certain theories are verboten. I'm big on what they call the plasma cosmology or the Thunderbolts project. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Thunderbolts project, but
I heard of the electric universe. Have you heard about that?
The electric universe people. So I'm big on that. What I like about that is that they are telling us a story, and they're telling us a story based on what is clearly evidence that humanity in its own time has seen massive catastrophes. I was big on Velikovsky. I've read Worlds in Collision, and it blew my mind reading Worlds in Collision, where he would talk about the disasters that are described in the Old Testament, right? And show how the same disaster is described on the other in another tradition entirely from the Southern Hemisphere. The flood, all these things now had a place that you could say, well, these were catastrophes, but there was something going on in the sky. It was extraterrestrial. And I mean extraterrestrial, I mean extra planetary. Like the idea that the solar system wasn't always this clockwork system where everything is the idea that, that Mars and Venus may have been, Venus may have been a comet. This is just I love this stuff, right? And it tells a more interesting story, and it frames. And I like when these stories can be seen as being stories that you can see in the Bible, stories that are in the Bible that tell us about, like, obviously the plagues. And so Velikovsky gets into what all the plagues of Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea, like what could have caused the sea to be completely disrupted to such a point where they could pass through it. So I think that that's my view, just to say that I like mythology. I'm big on it. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell. I've been reading him a lot lately. I'm currently almost done Occidental mythology. I like, and I think that it's all tied in with our larger universe. I want to say something too about this, because it's something that is not really mentioned very often, but the Sun, Moon, Earth system is we have on this planet, we get eclipses. And eclipses.
What are the odds of that happening?
Doesn't happen anywhere else in the solar system.
Yeah.
The Earth, the apparent diameter of the moon is 30 seconds of arc. Mm-hmm. So like this.
Yeah.
And the apparent diameter of the sun is also 30 seconds of arc.
Wow.
And we have cycles that we're able to, but like there's a Saros cycle and there's a Metonic cycle, but these cycles tell us where, show us a path to these eclipses, and we can predict pretty much where the eclipse is going to be based on where we are in the cycle. Nowhere does this happen. Nowhere. And whether you believe in a Christian God or anything else, that fact, the sun, moon, earth system, the eclipses are reminding us every time how special we are.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really despise about a lot of modern science, modern contemporary science and philosophy, is they want to keep telling us how unspecial we are.
Yeah.
How insignificant we are.
Yep.
And I don't believe that for a second.
No.
We are, at the very least, we can say for sure, with certainty, that in this solar system, we are damn special.
Yeah.
There's no other planet like us.
Or blessedly special, I would say.
Yeah, blessedly special.
Instead of damned special. But what about random? I want to talk to you about, because a lot of modern atheistic scientists believe in uncaused effects because they believe in true randomness. They believe that, for example, in quantum theory, they believe that things happen without a cause. It's nonsense, and it's complete nonsense. And even Einstein said God does not play dice, even though he's not exactly a poster child for monotheism. But anyone with common sense knows there's no such thing as an uncaused effect, and there's no such thing as true randomness. When we talk about randomness, all we can talk about is our own ignorance. We don't have access to the details to see at the depth of the quantum or whatever to make a reliable prediction. That's it. That's all that randomness is. It's an admission of our ignorance and the limitations on our ability to know. That's it. So what do you think about this modern obsession with obscuring our special status as human beings in that Darwinian tree of life, if you want to call it that, or the tree of death, really? Yeah. And the obsession they have with obscuring things like free will. They don't believe in free will. They don't believe that even in causality, when you get right down to it, because they're willing to make exceptions to the principle of sufficient reason. There's a principle of sufficient reason that says that everything that happens for a reason. There's a perfectly valid explanation for absolutely everything that happens. But the atheists are desperate to have a little corner in the universe, whether it's the quantum universe, the relativistic universe, or anywhere in between, a little corner where they can obfuscate the hard reality of morality, the hard morality of hard science. It's a denigration, I think, of the natural sciences, and particularly of physics and philosophy.
Absolutely. This has been my and this is something that was that Kester sort of introduced me to. This idea, for instance, that evolution takes place by a random mutation that is either rejected according to the environment or takes because of the environment, or adapted, right? I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe anything is random. Everything, if there's anything that the natural world teaches us, is that everything that is alive has purpose. We live purposely, purposefully, right? And the random thing is, again, the ultimate result is that it takes away our agency.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's dehumanizing.
And it's anti-nature.
Yep.
And I for a guy who's lived in the city, I do believe that we have to grasp that nature is. We live on this planet, and one of the biggest problems we have is that, by being in the city, we become separated. We're living in a synthetic environment. No getting around that. I'm a city boy.
Yeah.
But I think that it's one of the things that Kessler, as an atheist, would say, or maybe an agnostic, but he used to proclaim himself, I think, an atheist, was that there's a lot of evidence of design in nature. And he would show, and this is before that there was, he wrote these books, these critiques in the 60s. So there was no intelligent design as such. But he was like, so here we see, and he gives numerous examples of where design is inherent in nature. Like the eye is a favorite, right?
Yeah.
Like the eye is this incredibly designed thing. How do you get to a random mutation there?
Mm.
How is it that how is it that happens? He says, well, it's as if people. One of his he quoted, I think it was a scientist who said something like, saying random mutation, like evolution takes place by random mutation, is like saying that if you throw bricks in a pile, you'll eventually get a house. Yeah. That is not how it works. There's design everywhere, and in that respect, I'm in alignment with my Christian and Jewish and Muslim friends who are believe in God. So in that respect, I think that we have to see that there is design inherent in us and in all life. Where that design comes from, that's an open question in my mind.
Yeah. One of my guests, I'm going to have to wrap up here, but one of my guests, I'll send you the link. He's been on many times on my podcast. Sweet young man. He was raised Catholic. Now he's kind of agnostic, and he's sort of working for a Christian organization doing film and camera work. So he's sort of starting to get back exposed to Christianity. It's a Protestant outfit that he works for, but he's into the electric universe. I'll send you the link to the interview where he talks about that. Nick Stumphauser. Awesome. Nick Stumphauser. He does a bit of close-up magic with cards too, or he used to anyway. So interesting young man, lives in the States, and I'll send you the link for that. I'm looking forward to possibly interviewing a couple of our other common friends that we have in common. Thanks to my friend Ivan Freud, I met you and a bunch of other people, like-minded people. And what we have in common is so much more important than the things that differ from us philosophically and religiously. And speaking of which, last night I was speaking with Lisa. I hope to have her on my show. But she was emphasizing, she doesn't believe in God. She was raised Jewish, but she emphasizes the importance of natural law. And I said that is key. It's key to Christianity. It's key to Judaism. And hopefully it's key to Islam, although I don't know Islam as well. Natural law.
Yeah, in fact, I have to look at. There's a lot of. I've been familiar with it, but I have not done a deep dive like Lisa has. So I'd be interested to see what she has.
I'm sure you'll love it. It's just about the fact that there is a truth, there is a reality, and things have a purpose and a nature. Humans have a human nature, and I would say, as a Catholic, marriage has a nature. There's a purpose, and there's an objective, well-ordered role for marriage. One man, one woman, not closely related, open to life, etc., and so on, with a self-sacrificial, self-giving love and a mutual love and these sorts of things. This is what marriage is, right? And so we can't just, some Supreme Court judges can't just redefine it, or redefine what's a man, what's a woman, what's a human being, what's an ape, and all these sorts of things. And Darwin went a long way to helping the godless baby killers with abortion, but also with redefining marriage and redefining sex, or as they would call it, gender. So there's a real spiritual battle taking place. I think natural law is the key to people like you who are maybe a little bit trepidatious about the blood on the hands of the monotheists in history and this sorts of things. But natural law, it's a nice entry point, and it's absolutely essential to know that there is truth, and we do have what I would call the God-given right to life, liberty, and the security of the person, and these sorts of things that are supposed to be protected not only by our politicians but by the cops and by everyone else that's serving us, right? They're supposed to be public servants protecting the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We're a long way from that. Now, to close up, I just want your thoughts, your closing thoughts on the European members of the European Parliament that ripped into Trudeau. What did you think about that?
I love it. I love it. I mean, Trudeau, my God.
But he got a standing ovation, apparently, according to the CBC.
There was about 30% of the people weren't even there. Were only 30% of the sitting members were there.
Everyone had
was like we're all gone. No one can stand him. He's a joke. He's and what's interesting is that I like that he's being called that, because like they're calling it out for what it is, and it's great to see him being, because obviously he's not challenged at all in Canada.
No.
I mean, he's fawned over in Canada by the media, even as like most people can't stand him. Really, it's gotten to a point. I mean, we know that he didn't even get the popular vote in the last election.
Yeah.
So he's not. In fact, but the media just soft pedals everything. He's a golden boy in Canada, and then he gets out of Canada. And I don't know if you saw on top of the European one, but there was a British, an English show, was on the BBC or something, where they were ripping into him when he talked about the how there was a slide into people voting for more authoritarian leaders.
Ooh.
I don't know if you caught that when he said, like, that people our democracies are seeing slippage and moving towards the election of more authoritarian leaders.
Oh.
And it was the most bizarre thing. So they ripped into him for what he'd said, because he was like clearly being hypocritical. And it's amazing how many Canadians actually buy up his hypocritical, like he's just, this is he's just a bad actor. He's a bad actor. And so, yeah, what do I think about it? Love it. Love it.
It's surprising. I mean, I'm very skeptical about politics. And so part of me thinks, conspiracy theory, maybe the whole world's a stage and all the people that are opposing the globalists are actually just controlled opposition. It's all just theater to have us polarize. Oh, we've got someone fighting for us on our side, and they're representing, Trump speaks for me, and whatever populist leader or someone. Part of me is a little bit skeptical like that. Like, there's no one that has pure intentions who's in the domain of the politics and that sort of thing.
This is why to go back to what we said, this is why we have to
build
live
our
as
own.
if they don't exist.
Yeah.
In a sense, and create the world that we want, and if they tell us not to do something, then we should probably do it, given the way things are, because they invert everything. And I have to say that one of the big themes that I've seen coming out of this, and you talk about the Antichrist. When I was a kid, I watched The Exorcist when I was like 12 or something.
Scary.
And you have like the upside down cross. And I was, what's with this upside down cross? And I remember in 2020, because I kept saying how everything was upside down, like everything was completely turned on its head, and that hasn't stopped. The inversion, and to me, that inversion is a sign. I mean, dare I say it, a satanic element is at play, because they invert everything. A truth is now a lie is a truth, and a truth is a lie. They've just it's shocking, and we have I mean, anti-globalist for sure, but honestly, I don't believe that politics is the answer. We need a far more comprehensive revolution.
Grassroots. I was telling my wife Anna about a few months ago, or whenever it was, talking about the concentration camps for the unvaxxed and this sort of thing, like that built camps in Australia and these sorts of things, and in Canada, and just the possibility of that, and to allay her fears, not that she was fearful of it, but just sort of this idea. It was like, it's a horrible idea. But I told her, no, it's not a horrible idea, because you see that trucker convoy when it first started. Did you see the people, the nice, wholesome families on the overpasses? Did you see those people? That's our people. And if we do get shipped off into concentration camps, it's going to be all of us together, all these people that are human, truly human, with their foibles, with their selfishness, with their problems, and with their, they're annoying human beings just like us, okay? But they're human. They love truth. They love justice. They love their children. They love their families. They love life. They love everything that's good and wholesome.
Yeah. And this is how we can be aligned. This is how you and I, coming from very different perspectives, this is how we are aligned, because we embrace our humanity.
Yeah.
We're not denying it. And this has been one of the great lessons.
And we won't sell it at any price. We will not sell it for any price.
Tell you what, somebody said, "I'll give you $1 million, Johnny, if you take the get fully vaxxed." I'm like, take it. I don't care.
No, even if it's $1 trillion.
No, there's no amount of money.
Yeah.
That is like, I say $1 million because I'm old.
Used to be a lot of money. Used to be
all the power you want in the earth. I'm like, not going to happen.
No.
Not going to happen.
No.
And this is the interesting thing. This is where it's really funny, because like there's no way we'd be having this conversation without Trudeau and Legault.
Yeah, they united us.
They united
brought us together.
And you and I have very different perspectives on this, but we believe in something greater. We believe in our humanity.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing that's come out of this. It's like, I've been shocked at the alignments I've made. And coming from a traditionally left agnostic, but always spiritual, as my friend Alan would say, you're an agnostic, you're a cop-out. But it's been amazing. And that's what we have to embrace. We have to embrace what brings us together. And there's nothing more important than this.
Yeah.
Nothing. So that's where I stand on that.
Thanks a lot for taking the time. It's coming up to 2.5 hours now. Time flew by there talking with you.
I hope it's not too rambling.
No, not at all. Not at all. And we'll do it again. I have plans to talk to you again, talk to Tommy again, talk to Lisa Human. I'm gonna interview Human tomorrow. So it's just awesome. I really appreciate the space and the role that you play, and that Jen and Martin, everyone that plays. And I don't want to say too much about the space.
For people listening, just so that you know, we don't have to say exactly where we at, but basically, having been through all the lockdowns or whatever, when we knew that we were going to be locked out, some friends and I and myself, we decided, okay, well, we have access. We've secured a location for our kind of a shared space that is not an apartment. And we have met a whole bunch of people through this space. And that was because we wouldn't let Legault tell us what we can or cannot do. We brought agency out of a necessity, right?
It's an oasis. It's honestly an oasis. And speaking for myself, my wife, and my friend Anthony, you know that we love you. We appreciate you. And it's an oasis. It really is a breath of fresh air. And the vaxxed and waxed have no idea what they're missing. They have no idea what they're missing. No idea.
No, I know. It's incredible. It's really weird to go down to because now we're allowed to go into places we weren't allowed to go into before. Yeah. Now I go in, it's like everything's normal, except me. I'm changed. I am changed.
Yeah. We can't go back. We can't go back. And I don't want to go back. No, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. Just like that abused wife who realizes her husband is a sadistic rapist killer, she doesn't want to pretend anymore. She's done, at a certain moment, she's done pretending that he's a nice guy and that he has her best interests at heart. She's done, and she's fed up, and she gets justice, and she starts building a new life, and that's what we are doing, right? It's enough is enough. Enough with the abuse, enough with the rape, enough with the murder. And no means no, and you're not a nice guy, and you're not my friend. And that's it. That's it. So we appreciate everything you do, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Great having you. Great having you all. It's been a really incredible time in the last 6 months.
For sure. And we'll talk very soon, and I'll have you back, and maybe we'll do that roundtable discussion at some point. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I like it.
Take care of yourself, and we'll talk very soon, okay?
Bye.
God bless. Bye.